Changing your engine oil is the single most important thing you can do for your car. I've heard lots of stories about what happens if you don't change your oil, if you don't change it often enough, and frankly, I just always have changed it, so I've never learned any of these the hard way. But I'm sure you could find something good online.
What is that, 29 minutes? Still right. Now we're at 45 minutes. Well, we're on, what's the minute there? We got 49 minutes. It goes. Still doesn't want to see. I don't believe it. Don't go that high, man. You're gonna blow up. There he goes.
These are the tools you need for your oil change: socket, socket wrench, oil filter wrench, a bucket to drain the used oil into, and of course some oil. I believe changing your oil every 3,000 miles is a little bit of a scam. It wastes oil and costs you more money than you need to spend on your car. I typically wait around 3,500 to 4,500 miles before I change my oil. I base this mainly on my driving. If I feel like I'm driving in a hot climate, or a lot of stop and go traffic, or if I've been kind of hot rodding my car a little bit more, I will change my oil a little bit sooner. The fall or climate where you get a lot of temperature swings from hot and cold, that gives you a little more condensation in the engine and can give you a little more corrosion, so it's not bad to change it then. You'll see when this oil comes out, it's going to be black. That's just what oil looks like when it comes out of an engine. Um, Even if you just change your oil, a lot of times it's pretty dark if you were to drain it back out, because you can never get all the used oil out of an engine. So if I was to grade this oil, it still has some life left, I think, from the color. I've seen oil that's even probably darker shade, because you'll see in a second there's actually a little bit of red here in the oil. But there's really no real way to test your oil by looking at it. You need to run it through a chemical analysis to tell what the viscosity of the oil would really be like. So sometimes people will give you a judgment on the color, but there's really no way to be accurate on that. So don't believe somebody if they hold you up your dipstick and say, "Wow, look how black this oil is." I've heard of gimmicks where they dip your oil into, or your dipstick, into really dark sludgy oil, just to show you that you really need an oil change, and there's all kinds of scams along that line. we go any further, we're going to take another look at the oil drain plug. You'll notice at the very tip there's a magnet. The magnet will need cleaned off. The purpose of the magnet is to collect metal fragments in the engine. There's also a gasket that can dry out that will need replaced from time to time. The nut on the end should look really square and clean there. Once it gets rounded off, you'll need to replace that. Oftentimes you can just remove the oil filter with your hand because you've only hand tightened it. But it's also handy to use an oil filter wrench. You can kind of see the way it bends around the filter. It has some grip on there that helps grip the filter as well, which makes it a lot easier and a little less stressful on your hand. If you look at this oil filter, it has this dipped in rubber at the end that helps it grip as well. I had an instructor in college that believed that you only had to change your filter every couple oil changes. I personally figure that the filter only costs a couple dollars, so I might as well just change it while I'm doing the oil change. Plus, keep in mind, if you don't remove the filter, you have around a half quart of oil stuck in the engine, somewhere in there, depending on how big your filter is. Oil will continue to drip out of the engine and the filter area for as much as 20-30 minutes. When you go get your oil change done, they don't wait that long for the oil to drain out of the car. Sometimes if I'm in a hurry, I don't quite wait that long either. But if you're wanting a really good oil change, you're going to have to wait until no drips are coming out, and then you've gotten as much of the old oil out as possible. When I tighten this oil nut, I don't use a torque wrench, but you can, and that would give you the exact setting to tighten this down to. I basically make it one hand tight. When you put two hands on there and tighten it, it's going to be too tight, and you can stretch out the threads and damage your oil nut there. Before you put on the new oil filter, make sure the old oil filter seal is off the engine. Here's what it looks like. If it's left on, you'll leak oil all over the place. I can check right here, make sure it's completely gone. And then I can install the new one. I wipe a little bit of oil along the new oil seal before I install the new oil filter. This ensures a nice contact between the filter seal and the engine. Okay, now I'm getting ready to refill the engine with oil. Basically, you can look on your oil cap and it usually tells you what kind of oil to put in your engine. I usually use a funnel, makes things a little less messy. If you drip oil all over into your engine, you can you'll have a lot of smoke from it burning, plus the oil can corrode some of the wires or the rubber parts to where they can become damaged over time, especially your spark plug wires from oil. You can make them arc out, things like that. So I just kind of pour in my oil. I do a little bit at a time, and I try to get about 1 quart shy of where I think I need to be, or about a half a quart, and then I'll start the engine, and then I'll top it off there at the end. Most engines are going to be about 4.5 quarts to 6 quarts, so there's kind of a wide range depending on how big your engine is. Basically, the more you change your oil, you'll be able to figure all that out. One thing that's kind of handy is the oil containers have a little chart on the side that helps measure the oil out, and I'd recommend using that. It'll make your life just a little bit easier. I just buy the oil by the gallon. It's a little bit cheaper that way instead of buying all the separate quarts, and that'll help save you some money. Obviously 2 gallons is That's 8 quarts, so I basically just save the leftover for my next oil change. I transfer the used oil back into the gallon jugs and take it in to get it recycled. It doesn't cost any money to take it to an auto parts store to recycle it. They love it because they actually make a little bit of money once enough oil is collected. There's some places that even burn oil, used oil in their furnaces. I know like some of the shops like Midas and Tuffy, some of them do that. I guess I prefer just to take it to somebody who's going to recycle it. Now you can check your engine coolant. This tank here in the back is your overflow tank. It'll have some readings on the side where it says it's full hot or full cold. Depending on if your engine's hot or cold, the fluid will expand in the heat. This is my radiator cap. If the engine is cooled off, remove the cap to test the coolant level. So now I've removed it. I'm gonna put this tester in here, and basically what it does is it tells me the quality of my antifreeze. It tells me the boiling point, and it also tells me the freezing point. Basically you're looking for that little triangular arrow that floats on the left there, and it points to a reading, and that's the reading that the antifreeze is good to. To change this reading, I need to alter my coolant. Take a little bit out, put a little bit in, add some more antifreeze and the right amount of water. Here's my coolant in here. You see this is getting a little dirty in here. That means it might be time to flush my radiator one of these days, but the coolant itself looked real good. Over here's my power steering fluid. It basically has a dipstick that you pour it right into that opening as well. It'll tell you the temperature when it's, or the reading when it's hot or when it's cold. Here's my brake fluid. Basically, if you look in there, it should be almost to the top. There is a indicator on the side. I'll show you in just a second. Walk around. Here's your washer fluid. Back here's the brake fluid again. There's a reading. It says max and min, and you just kind of want it up by the maximum. I don't usually change my brake fluid unless there's a problem with my brakes. Back here is a transmission fluid dipstick. This one, your transmission needs to be warm, and your car needs to be idling in park and not on a hill. You'll see the fluid color there is red, and it looks pretty good. It's a pretty long dipstick. The dipstick actually tells you right on it to check it when it's cold, or when it's warm, and when the car is in park. I was trying to read it for you here, but I guess you're probably not going to be able to see it. Over here's my air filter. I have a high performance air filter in here, so I know it's clean. But if I want to take it out and check it, there's just 4 bolts that I remove. I checked it on the last oil change, so I'm not going to waste it. This vehicle has a gauge or indicator that shows how much of your air filter you have left. I don't know if I would rely on this source, but it's interesting, and you'll find it in a lot of newer vehicles. Don't forget to write down when you need your next oil change. I write it down on the windshield, top left corner, with a Sharpie. You can usually erase the old one, or at least most of it, and then write your new numbers on there. A new technology affecting oil change intervals is the Oil Life Monitor. This computer software determines when to change the oil based on engine operating conditions. The monitor looks at mileage, speed, and idling time to calculate when you should change your oil. There is no actual oil condition sensor or chemical analysis of the oil. In fact, you could drain all the oil and replace it with any fluid, and the oil change monitor would have no way of knowing it. Additionally, the Oil Life Monitor does not monitor how well your oil filter is working. Contaminated oil is just as harmful, if not more so, than oxidized motor oil. Basically, it's just a useful tool that should be used with common sense and good judgment. To reset the oil life of this vehicle, all that is needed is to turn the key without starting the engine and step on the gas pedal 3 times. Now it's time to learn how to change a baby's diaper.
Many diapers for this?